everyone, and welcome to issue 11 of the CMC Solves webinar series. We're delighted to have this special edition for our colleagues in Australia. And today we're going to talk specifically about complaint handling in a next-gen sort of a fashion. How do we turn negatives into positives? As always with our CMC Solves series, we have topics that are chosen not by us but by you. So while today we're going to talk about what positive reporting can do and how the regulators always want to help and whether managing complaints is a nuisance or an opportunity and how to capitalize, we're going to talk about lots of topics of interest over time, and we really want your feedback. So if you could, at the end of this webinar, fill in the post-webinar survey, which will pop up as soon as you say you want to close, and send us emails at the address that's on the screen right now, because any ideas you have about how to make this more useful for you makes it not only more useful for us, but more fun to do. So thanks for your feedback. Let's kick off and get going. So if we were to look at what's been happening in the past, the first question you have to ask is, why bother changing? We've had these semi-manual processes, and they've worked to some form or fashion. We've managed our customers, and there might even be a downside in hearing too much from our customers as this complaints manager in the cartoon has experienced. But in truth, what we're trying to do with this topic is see if there are ways to avoid enforcement actions that could come our way if we don't do something new, and improve our customer retention performance so that we can increase revenue and get some ideas from our customers who can tell us what isn't working in our delivery of our services and maybe give us some ideas with which we can reduce expenses. As you all are painfully aware, there are some changes afoot right now in Australia, and we've gotten a renewed interest from the OAIC. I always say it backwards, so if I say AOIC, just assume it's dyslexia, but I do mean the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, who's taking on the role sort of like our beloved Consumer Financial Protection Bureau here in the States. And the focus from the point of view of the regulators has been that there's now going to be a great deal of change in the relationship between consumers and credit bureaus and credit providers. As you know, the positive reporting that is just about to take place in Australia brings with it a number of new obligations for the creditors in terms of the information being made available, and for the bureaus in terms of handling that information. But what it also means is that there'll be many more opportunities for the data, especially as this thing just gets started, for the data to be corrupted or just flat wrong in some ways. And one of the key principles here in the changes to the Privacy Act is that they're now requiring that the credit provider that first catches the complaint owns the resolution of the dispute through to completion. So whereas before, maybe if a consumer walks into Westpac complaining about something that that ANZ did to them or that Commonwealth did to them, now the person at Westpac is responsible for getting back to that consumer all the way through to the persons at the other bank that dealt with the customer, the resulting credit bureau situation that the consumer is disputing, and the fix is the same. So that means a lot more work for the credit bureau who catches the complaint. And the fines are not insubstantial. So you've got a new requirement, you've got a new penalty if you don't meet the requirement, and you've got consumers increasingly vigilant given this positive reporting, which has been described as a boon to consumers, but possibly they'll have great expectations. So all of that stuff that we are worried about, that we hear from you that you're worried about, and layer in at the same time the major credit providers are going from basically a one bureau situation where they're considering relationships with multiple bureaus. As always, our friends at the regulatory bodies only want to help, and this cartoon talks about they're helping not just about complaints, but our complaints handling procedures. And your friends over here in the U.S. aren't helping. There's been quite a lot of Sturm and Drang about what's gone on with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But at the end of the day, the consumeristas are touting new enforcement actions that have measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars to some of the major credit providers over here, and they're squarely pinning the credit on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for getting results for credit card holders. So to the extent our regulators here in Australia are looking for permission or some precedent upon which to gauge their own efforts and in being more aggressive, they're certainly finding that in ample terms here in the U.S. So with that, we're going to launch a poll question, and that question is, have you noticed any change in your own organization as you're getting ready for the management of complaints due to this new OAIC oversight? And it isn't really a choose all that apply. It's we've either significantly revamped our complaint management, or we've sort of made changes to the complaint management practices, or we haven't really made changes, but we're looking at making changes, or we're proceeding business as usual. I'm going to leave this poll open for just another minute, and not even a minute. Looks like everybody's responded. Good. So we're sort of at the not yet but looking at it, or the sort of phase. So that's interesting. Thank you for that. So is this really a nuisance or an opportunity? As this cartoon points out, it would be a big problem if I got rid of my complaints by getting rid of my customers. And there was an article recently over here in the American Banker magazine to that effect that says, really, banks need to revamp customer service operations. So how could it be an opportunity? Clearly, if we are talking about the ability to preempt complaints that go to regulators by providing an approachable and visible process demonstrating quick return to action and responsiveness, and have a transparent way to report on it, what we could accomplish is not only taking the wind out of the consumer's sails by solving the problems, but more importantly, have data that we can use to improve the customer's experience with our bank. So what are we doing today in banks? It seems like what we're hearing in our travels is that we have a number of manual systems that capture incidents but don't really provide any proactivity or any management of the process. Any customer input that happens on a dynamic basis doesn't reflect in new steps in the process. And we're not securing our communications to the other parties to the complaint. And that's maybe because that's new. I mean, I understand this new requirement that the person that catches the complaint has to manage it all the way through is a new requirement, but it will cause us to have to communicate between credit providers and bureaus in a way that we've never had to do that before. The fact that the processes we've found aren't standardized across either products or lines of business or even across creditors means that not only will the customer experience a different process for resolution, but the customers will get different experiences in terms of the reporting. And we try to report on complaints that aren't categorized consistently and try to report on efforts that aren't coordinated, we lose any real chance to streamline those activities. And, quite frankly, we lose visibility. If we just shoot the complaint off to the Bureau, especially if we've caught a complaint that wasn't an on-us complaint, we don't have any way to see the problem resolution, see how the consumer gets notified, and we don't get sort of the bigger picture view by aggregating all the data. And as we have listened to you, banks have been telling us that the current manual processes are prone to some errors where complaints either get just lost in black holes in the organization or some no man's land between parties, and that could be between different departments within the bank or between banks in this new regime that we're talking about. And so as a result, customers don't always get their feedback. So if we were able to fill these gaps, we'd not only be able to create a consistent way to capture the complaints, both for our own measurements and for provability to regulators, which is key here, but with a consistent data set to analyze, we could streamline our operations and improve the customer's experience, which should then lead to increased revenues and decreased costs as we take some of the complexity out by automating it. And of course, doing those things would be accompanied by reducing the regulatory risk of an enforcement action. So I'm going to launch the next survey on the question here of whether your bank has recently deployed any new automation to capture and track complaints as it relates to the guidelines. So I'm not very good at this. Launch the poll. Okay, here we go. You should be seeing this poll question, and I'd ask you guys to fill in whether you've already deployed new automation or you haven't automated any new complaint, or whether you're in planning phases or whether you're just interested in hearing more about it. So I'm going to leave it open for about another 5 seconds. Okay, I've got answers. Good. So it looks like there's a lot of opportunity to talk about it since everyone's either in planning or in tell me more mode. So what challenge are we talking about here? We're talking about being able to catch and code all these complaints in a consistent manner and route them to the correct department, or in the case of the new OAIC guidelines, the right creditor, and therefore to the Bureau and so forth. And then capture what was done and ensure that it's done in a timely fashion with a way to escalate any complaints that get stuck in an inactive mode, and making sure that we get back to the customers, that we get back to the Bureau, the other bureaus that weren't the ones that actually occasioned the complaint in the first place, and then have data to analyze in terms of trends and root causes, and all of this in an environment where the target is moving, given this brand new positive reporting environment and all that it's going to create that we don't even know yet. So if I break the challenge down, I want to capture the relevant information as well as I can directly from the consumer, regardless of whether they walk in my branch or call my call center or talk to one of my third-party agencies, or whether they're in fact talking to one of my competitors about me. Then I want to make sure the complaint gets routed to whoever originated the data to the the information to the credit bureau that caused the person to dispute their bureau in the first place. And then I need to access the individual actions that both the credit provider and the bureau take, both so I can get back to the consumer in a timely fashion and so I can analyze what happened to that complaint, so I can get to some root cause in order to implement remediation. Now that's the reason that the regulators say they put this all in place in the first place, is to help us do root cause analysis and implement remediations. Really, it's all about making sure our system is structured enough that we can capture the information and prove to those overseers that we're doing the right things and that we're doing the right things at the right time with the right people. So with that, I'm going to ask you to do yet another poll, which is, where would you position your bank's complaint capture and tracking on a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is, yeah, we capture complaints, but we file them in our own format and really have no way to deal with a complaint that isn't an on-us complaint dealt with within us. Or in the midpoint, yeah, we gather these complaints and try to report on them in the OAIC's desired format, but we're still mostly dealing with our own complaints. All the way through to a 5 would be, we have a completely OAIC, see, I am dyslexic, an OAIC-compatible automated complaint capture and tracking system that also provides proactivity and next required actions. So, sorry, I don't think I launched it. So I'm not seeing any answers because I didn't give you the questions. So if you could quickly rate yourselves on that 1 to 5 scale, I'll just give you another 10 seconds or so. Thank you for your answers already. So not unlike the earlier question, it looks like we have a lot of opportunity here because pretty much everybody is capturing the complaints and filing them in their own format. I'll close the poll. Thanks for that. So that's good. That's an opportunity. That leads to my next slide, which is how can CMC help? Basically, what we can do is help position you for success by something we call our Credagility Complaint Capture and Tracking Solution, which provides for online capture, whether it's a customer directly or the credit provider, an automated workflow that is also visible to all of the participants, and some automated alerting and notifications that keep things moving, all of which is done in a systemic way that allows you to capture not just the responses and the actions, but even the documentation that's supporting the complaint. So the workflow is there to handle the routing and ensure that the handling is consistent and fair across all customers. And it's all there so you can prove it to the regulators. And finally, it uses this Credagility platform is the same platform that delivers our Flex, Collect, and our Flex Collect recovery solutions for automating your collections activities and those of your recovery and DCAs. So our complaint capture and tracking solution makes the most of automation to ensure that you get consistent handling, that you don't allow complaints to get stuck in any sort of backwater or black hole part of the process, and provides for queues that would escalate and automated alerts that would remind people if a particular complaint has been waiting too long for an answer. And of course, everything that's done in the system is captured so that you can both generate the automated notifications back to consumers and the other credit provider and the bureaus, but also for reporting purposes. Now, part and parcel of the Credagility platform is the ability to build a workflow that's at once available to both agents and to consumers through a portal, a GUI, that's part of our Credagility platform, just like the agent desktop GUI. And that would allow the consumers to be the data entry clerks, which I like, and even give consumers the ability to capture any supporting documentation and provide the consumers with the ability to check the status of their complaint, so that as we get deluged with complaints in this new positive reporting environment, we don't have to, ridiculously staff up just to answer questions about what's happening with my complaint. And finally, reporting. That's a natural byproduct of systemically capturing and managing all of these different activities. So I'm going to take a moment out and just provide an example. Many of you may have heard that we are partnering with a company called the Australian Credit and Data Company, which is putting together an industry-wide hub for the management of complaints that's being run on our Credagility platform. So this ACD company is an independent service provider that's going to try to offer standardized processes related to corrections and complaints and create a consistent corrections and complaints structure with one point of contact for these complaints in a multi-bureau environment that then leads you to say this independent service provider has the ability and the wherewithal and the motivation to continue to innovate and to make sure that the current network of credit providers have an independent means to work together without having to do a lot of integration and interoperation by creating a secure channel for transfer of data. So let me tell you how that's going to work. At the back end, what our Credagility platform allows us to do is set up a playbook. The playbook is a workflow, and the workflow is how do I want to handle each complaint when I get it, where does it get routed, does it get routed internally or externally, and how does that work? Within the workflow, I can define what we call workflow surveys, where I ask specific questions that the consumer or the agent talking to the consumer is going to fill in. We can also, within that same Credagility system, set up all the documentation, both the outbound documentation in any format. You see this silly moon landing example, but any of the documentation that's going to go out, notifications to various parties, can all be designed by you and inserted as appropriate into the right part of the workflow so that those documents automatically happen when they're supposed to happen, including disclosures. So if a person's online or if they're talking to an agent, I can make sure I pop up the right disclosure to them. So when a customer comes in and wants to enter a complaint, they would come to the particular website and start to either open a new complaint or view and update details of an existing complaint, and then they'd be taken through a series of questions which are defined by that workflow that I just mentioned to you. They're going to answer the questions, and then they're going to also provide information that could include updating a document, uploading a document that is their supporting document for why they say, for example, I paid my bill, and it says I didn't pay my bill, and therefore Vita has a black mark on my credit. And what I want is for you to fix that, because here's the billing statement that says I paid it. And we can allow the consumer to capture that information and grab more data about it, or simply take the document and then we can look at it in our complaint administration. Either way, in this particular case, we went ahead and thanked the consumer for submitting their complaint request and assuring them it will be sent onwards, and they'll be getting written advice outlining the process. Now, about that document, we can have the workflow capture information I call metadata to tell me, and this is an example of a different kind of document that isn't a complaint document but serves a purpose. So in this case, I've uploaded a document that's my licensure in a particular territory. And in this particular example, I'm adding all the information about what the renewal dates and so forth will be on this document so that I can build alerts and workflow steps to know when, in this case, you would need to prompt for a renewal of that document. Or in the case of the consumer, you can have them enter the information about what the contents of the document are so you don't have to do it yourself. And then you can have someone in your customer service department who's working the complaint look at it and make sure that the document is what they said it was and that it contains the information they said it contained. Or you could have them actually do the step before that and do the metadata as they look at the document. You can do it either way. At the end of the day, all of the complaints in the system are being tracked so that an administrator can look at all of the answers to all of the questions for all of the complaints, including the documentation that's been uploaded. And I can summarize that in a very simple dashboard view that says, these are my complaint causes, these are my people being complained about. You can envision this within your organization and then take another view of the same thing that shows how many of each of these have been captured for each individual institution that you've had to deal with and send them off to. So if you think about this whole system that we're talking about, this hub, you're talking about the individual consumer that comes in and lodges a complaint request to whichever credit provider they run into. That credit provider captures that complaint using Credagility, and it automatically goes to the complaint hub. The hub's going to respond back to the consumer saying, you know, we received your complaint, we understand what's going on, and to the extent that we need to get additional supporting documents or additional information about the documents, we can request that at that point. Now, this complaint may not be on the person that responded. They just happen to be the person that caught it. So the hub will send the complaint off and route it to the credit provider who was the source of the information or the source of the misinformation, for example, in this particular complaint. And the hub is going to take that credit provider's input to capture the data, send it back to the credit bureau, who will then look at that information, and they can update the specific information with that customer and let the credit provider know that the information has been corrected so that that credit provider can update the hub. The hub can then update all of the people to whom the outcomes need to be passed and send a notification to the individual. So the hub manages all the communications, the hub manages the routing, and the hub manages the quality control to make sure that everything is happening according to Hoyle. So what are the advantages Credagility brings to a complaint management process? Clearly, automating through built-in workflows will ensure compliance. Having the survey capture is going to streamline the capture, and having built in the ability to manage all the communications and a comprehensive engine to report on what happened means that you can have this system really manage all of the challenges inherent in this new OAIC dictum. The other thing is that even if you go with the industry hub, the Credagility platform allows you to customize the workflows to your own internal bank processes and integrate to those as well. At the end of the day, that means that you'll have the ability to report on and to prove to the regulators that you're in control of all the complaint processes and any changes that you've made, that you're empowering your customers to provide the input to the extent that you can get them to do your data entry. That's always a good thing. And enable full transparency across the bank. But any communications from you would be branded to you. By automating this, the regulatory audits will not require a huge comport of people when you want to be audited and find out what happened. And as I mentioned, you can leverage the same infrastructure and the same expertise that CMC brings to bear in solving collections and recoveries problems. So, end of the day, the regulators and you yourselves can be confident that these right policies are in place, that no complaints are going unanswered, and that you've got comprehensive reports that don't have any leakage. And non-secure communications via, say, email or other can be eliminated because you want all of the workflow to be automated in one place so that the complaints are queued to relevant third parties, but they keep all logging into Credagility to get at the complaint, route it to the next person, and so forth. And in that way, you create enormous visibility to the overall handling and resolution, but the work is actually happening at the most efficient resource. So instead of being a nuisance, complaint management can be a shining example of compliance. So automation obviously drives lower expense. Systematizing the business rules drives consistency. This is a quick and easy to deploy system because it's cloud-based, and it's enormously flexible to handle all the changes that are going to come as positive reporting starts to take hold and we learn what we didn't know that we needed to know about it. So I see I have about a minute or two left. I'm wondering about questions, and I see one that's come in that says, talk to me about cost. Well, the answer, of course, is it depends on the specific structures that you're looking for and the volume and size of the operation that you need to put in place. But I can tell you that the justification analysis comes down to the avoidance of a huge staffing up in order to meet these new regulatory requirements, and also the avoidance of enforcement actions that will come if we do depend on trying to do this manually. So I would like to deal with that question on a more specific basis than general basis, other than to say it's very cost effective and our client base are very pleased with the services that we provide and the benefits they get from them. One last question before we close. How does this interact with the complaint system I already have in place? Great question. So the answer is it can interoperate any way you want it to, from setting this one up, as in the example of the hub, to be the catcher and manager of that complaint and all the data associated with that complaint all the way through to completion and closing out across all the different credit providers and credit bureaus that are involved, and then send the information to your complaint system so that you have a full record of what happened on that complaint and its resolution, and it's recorded in accordance with your particular complaint categories. On the other end of the spectrum, you could say you want your complaint system to catch the complaint and send to this Credagility platform what it's working on, and let Credagility forward it on to the other credit bureaus and credit providers. So that's the sort of ends of the spectrum. Obviously, the first one's easier for us and therefore less expensive, but we can accommodate pretty many different scenarios. Pretty flexible platform, and pretty powerful to be able to do what you want it to do. So with that, I'm going to thank you all very, very much. Remember to give us your feedback and suggestions. Anytime that you have a question about any way that we can help you here at CMC, we'd be delighted to work with you, and want to thank you for your time. Good day.